In 1893, an American excavation team digging at Nippur, Iraq, pulled a clay tablet from the ground, catalog number CBS 10673. They photographed it, shipped it to Philadelphia, filed it, and for 118 years, the first column of that tablet was described in academic papers as containing a damaged passage of uncertain meaning. Not damaged, not uncertain, just inconvenient. Because in 2011, the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative ran the full text through a computational cross-reference against 90,000 other tablets. And what they found in that first column was not a creation myth. It was a count. 7 entries, each one describing a world, each one describing how that world ended. The last entry is incomplete. The clay is broken exactly where the ending would be. But the entry before it, the 7th, ends with a phrase that translates as follows: the fire that humans make.
The scribes who wrote CBS 10673 believed they were living in the 8th world. They were keeping count of what came before, and they believed the 8th world ends differently from the first 7. Not from the sky, not from the sea, not from poison or ice or disease, but from us. CBS 10673 is not a fringe document. It sits in the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Philadelphia, cataloged, photographed, and technically accessible to researchers. Physical dimensions: 11.4 centimeters wide, 8.7 centimeters tall. Dark gray baked clay. Excavated from Nippur during the American expedition of 1893 to 1896.
The tablet has 2 faces. The reverse contains the passage about the flood, the section scholars focused on for a century because it parallels the Noah narrative. That section made careers, was published, translated, debated, cited. And the obverse contains the 7-world list, which received 3 paragraphs in a 1925 academic survey, describing the repeating structure as poetic convention, the kind of literary repetition ancient writers used for rhythm and emphasis, and that interpretation held for 86 years. In 2011, the CDLI cross-reference changed that reading. The repeating structure was not poetic. Each entry used a different verb for destruction, different geographic references, different timelines, different survivors. This was not one story told 7 times. This was 7 different stories told once each. The tablet was a list ordered by time, a record of what came before the world the scribes were living in.
The first world the tablet names is called Eridu, not the Eridu we know from the Sumerian king list, but something older, a city before that city. The tablet describes it as the place where the line between those above and those below had not yet hardened. Eridu's end, the breath of Anu, a fire that came from the sky and turned the land to glass. And for 80 years, that phrase meant nothing to researchers. Then in 2004, a geological survey in southern Iraq found a layer of glass-like material in sediment samples dated to approximately 29,000 BCE. Fused silica, the kind of material produced when sand is subjected to extreme heat and pressure from above. An airburst, a cosmic impact detonating in the atmosphere with the force of a nuclear weapon, and the layer sits at exactly the depth the tablet's timeline would predict.
The second world is Bad Tibira, a civilization of metal workers. Its end, poison rising from below. The ground turned toxic. Water became undrinkable. Animals collapsed. Modern volcanology has a specific term for this: a limnic eruption, a sudden release of carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide from underground volcanic sources. Lake Nyos in Cameroon killed 1,700 people in a single night in 1986 through exactly this mechanism.
The third world is Larak, described as a civilization of sky watchers who tracked celestial movements with precision. Its end, the sky that fell. The sun vanished for a season of darkness. This matches what climate scientists call a volcanic winter, or impact winter. Enough particulate matter ejected into the upper atmosphere to block sunlight for months or years. And the Toba supervolcanic eruption 74,000 years ago did exactly this, reducing the global human population to an estimated 10,000 individuals, a near-extinction event we still carry in our DNA as a genetic bottleneck.
The fourth world Sippar ends not from above, but from below. The waters that rose without rain. A slow, steady rise of the ocean itself. Coastlines vanishing over decades. And this is post-glacial sea level rise. Between 14,000 and 8,000 BCE, ocean levels rose more than 120 meters as the ice sheets collapsed. In some periods, the sea rose 4 meters per century. Entire coastal regions vanished within a human lifetime. The Persian Gulf was dry land. What is now 30 meters of water was a green river valley with settlements, with people, with everything that gets built when people have been somewhere long enough.
The fifth world is Shuruppak. This is the one scholars recognize, the city of the flood, the city from which the Sumerian Noah, Ziusudra, comes. But the tablet's version of Shurupak's end is not a single flood. It describes the ice that moved, a force that ground cities to dust and pushed populations southward. Cold first, then the ice itself, then the meltwater floods when the ice retreated. This is an Ice Age cycle in compressed form. The scribes were describing something that took thousands of years and pressing it into a narrative. Later generations, the Babylonians, the Hebrews, compressed it further into a single god and a single flood and a single boat. But the structure underneath is the same. A world ended by water.
The sixth world is the most unsettling. The tablet names it Kian-gi, the Sumerian word for Sumer itself, not the Sumer we know, but an earlier version, a first draft. Its end, a sickness that could not be seen. People fell ill, seemed to recover, then died. The disease moved city to city along trade roads. This is pathogen transmission along established trade networks. The Black Death followed the Silk Road. Smallpox followed European trade ships to the Americas. And there is physical evidence, mass burial sites in southern Iraq predating the known Sumerian period. Dozens of bodies interred together with no signs of violence, consistent with a disease event, consistent with a population that ran out of people to dig individual graves.
The seventh world. The marks are too damaged to name it, but its ending is described in more detail than any of the others. The tablet calls it the turning of the earth's heart. The ground shook for 40 days without stopping. Water sources flowed backward. The stones used for navigation stopped pointing north. Mountains crumbled. New formations rose where flat land had been. The stars themselves appeared to shift position.
Earth scientists have a term for what this describes: geomagnetic excursion. A period when the magnetic field weakens dramatically, and the poles shift or temporarily reverse. And the Lechamp excursion 41,000 years ago reduced Earth's magnetic field to approximately 5% of its normal strength. Navigation by lodestone becomes useless. The auroras become visible worldwide, altering the appearance of the night sky. Solar radiation hits the surface at intensities the atmosphere normally blocks. And the Lechamp event coincides with one of the most significant extinction pulses in the Pleistocene. Multiple megafauna species disappearing. Neanderthal populations declining sharply. The seventh world ended the way the tablet says it ended. We have the geological record.
The tablet describes the eighth world differently from the first seven. The first seven were given knowledge, The tablet uses a specific Sumerian phrase for this, me-ba, the divine laws distributed. Writing, mathematics, agriculture, astronomy, architecture, medicine. Each civilization received the me, and each civilization lost them when its world ended. The eighth world received something different. It received all of the me at once, not gradually, not through a single sage or a single teacher, all of it directly. And the text describes this as unprecedented. No previous world had received the full me. The scribes understood this as significant. They also understood it as a test.
The tablet contains a phrase that has no comfortable translation. The closest rendering is, "The eighth is the one that must choose." The previous 7 were guided, instructed, managed. Their endings came from outside, from the sky, from the sea, from geological forces, from disease, forces the civilizations could not control and were not responsible for. And the eighth world's ending, if it comes, will not be from outside. The Sumerian word used for the cause of the eighth ending is Gish-bar-al, literally the great fire weapon. The word appears in other Sumerian texts, always connected to divine power, forces held by the Anunnaki, never by humans. And CBS 10673 is the only known text where Gish-bar-al is described as being in human hands.
The tablet was written approximately 4,000 years ago. At that time, Gish-bar-al was a term for something the scribes associated with the power to end worlds. And in 1945, we invented it. In 1952, we tested a version powerful enough to vaporize an island. The scribes were not prophesying. They were recording a pattern. 7 worlds rose, accumulated knowledge, and were ended by forces outside their control. The 8th world rose, received all the accumulated knowledge at once, and now holds in its own hands the mechanism its predecessors could never have accessed. The tablet describes what happened after each ending. The pattern is consistent across all 7. The first generation after the collapse survives. They remember everything. They carry the knowledge of the world that ended. The second generation begins to rebuild with fragments, tools salvaged, techniques half-remembered, inscriptions they can still partially read.
By the 3rd generation, the old writing is no longer fully readable. Not because people became less intelligent, but because the specialists who knew the full system died without completing the transmission. The engineers who understood the construction principles, the astronomers who maintained the calculations, the physicians who knew the full pharmacological knowledge. Each field requires continuous transmission, teacher to student, generation to generation. Interrupt that chain once, and specific knowledge disappears permanently. By the 4th generation, what the scribes call the second forgetting occurs. The old world becomes legend. The ruins of its cities are attributed to giants, to gods, to forces beyond human scale. Because nothing in the current generation's experience can account for what they are looking at.
The tablet describes the survivors of each ending doing something specific. They carved the most important knowledge into stone, not clay, which breaks and dissolves and requires indoor storage, but stone, the hardest available material, positioned at locations that would be findable, oriented to celestial markers that would remain stable across thousands of years. And the tablet calls these inscriptions the memory that does not rot. And it says, the children of the broken world could not read them. They preserved them. They built structures around them. They treated the locations as sacred. But the full meaning of the inscriptions was gone with the specialists who encoded it. And the tablet describes this loss as the intended failure of the system. Knowledge cannot survive as inscription alone. It requires living transmission.
It requires the teacher who knows what the marks mean.
The stones are still there. Göbekli Tepe, Karnak, the alignments at Nokta Playa, the underwater structures in the Gulf of Khambhat at 40 meters depth, carbon dated to 9,500 years ago, matching exactly the depth that would have been surface level during the post-glacial sea level transition. The stones are still there, and we are still calling them ritual. The tablet ends with a direct address, not to the scribe's contemporaries, but to whoever reads this after the next ending, using the Sumerian future imperative, not a description of what will happen, but an instruction for what to do. And the instruction has 4 parts. First, do not build at the coast. The scribes understood that every ending that involved water began at the coasts. The cities that survive are in the highlands. Move inland. Second, do not store knowledge in a single place. Every civilization that centralized its knowledge lost it completely when the center fell. Distribute. Redundancy is preservation. Third, do not allow the me to be held by the few. Every world that concentrated knowledge in a specialist class lost that knowledge when the class died. The knowledge must be common, distributed widely enough that no single catastrophe can eliminate the people who hold it. Fourth, and this is the one the scribes emphasized, do not build the fire that ends the world. The Sumerian phrase is explicit. Gish bar al is the only ending that does not come from outside. It is the only ending that requires no geological event, no impact, no pandemic. It is the only ending a civilization can produce for itself in a single generation. The previous 7 worlds did not have access to it. The 8th world built it, and according to the tablet, the choice of whether to use it is the thing that makes the 8th world different from all the others. Not the knowledge, not the technology, not the accumulated inheritance of 7 previous civilizations, but the choice.
CBS 10673 sits in Philadelphia. You can request access. The museum is open to researchers. The tablet is cataloged, preserved, and technically available, and most people do not request it. The first column, the 7 world list, has been in the published academic record since 2011. It is not discussed in mainstream archaeology courses. It is not referenced in standard histories of ancient Mesopotamia. It sits in the record the way the tablet sat in the museum. Present, accessible, not integrated into the narrative we have chosen to maintain about where we come from and how long we have been here. The scribes who pressed CBS 10673 into clay believed they were the 8th iteration. They believed 7 civilizations had risen before them, each guided, each ending. They believed they were living in the one that received everything and had to choose what to do with it. They wrote the warning down. They pressed it into clay, because clay lasts. The count on the tablet currently stands at 8, and whether it stays at 8 depends on a decision the scribes documented 4,000 years ago and could not make for us. They left the record, and the next entry is ours to write, or not to write. Subscribe, because in 2 days I am covering VAT 9116, the Berlin tablet that lists the Abzu as a facility with a maintenance schedule, workers recorded by name, tool allocations documented, and one entry from the final administrative cycle before the flood describes a task that appears in no other Sumerian administrative text, a task that only makes sense if you have read what CBS 10673 says about what was being preserved and why. The video is on screen. Click it. I'll see you in 2 days.